He was just a single farmer, known only for fixing tractors and tending fields. But one day, he made a bold bet. He'd fix a billionaire's broken Rolls-Royce in under 1 hour, or walk away from his career for good. Everyone laughed, until the engine roared to life. What happened next left the billionaire speechless. Stick around. This story will change the way you see ordinary people forever. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, unexpected love, and everyday miracles speak to your heart, consider subscribing. One click helps us bring more of these true-to-life inspirations into the world, and we're so grateful to have you with us. Now, let's begin. The morning sun spilled golden light across the open plains of Denton, Texas, casting long shadows across the goat pens and rust-covered machinery that dotted Jack Sullivan's modest farm. Birds chirped quietly above the rows of oak and pecan trees, and the air was thick with the earthy scent of soil, feed, and morning dew. Jack moved through his morning chores with the practiced ease of a man who found solace in routine, feeding the goats, checking the fences, and making sure the eggs were safely packed into cartons for delivery. At 54, Jack Sullivan had the posture of someone who'd carried more weight than his lean frame let on. His flannel shirt was faded, his jeans dirt-stained at the knees, and his boots bore the scars of years spent trudging through mud and sun-baked ground. His beard was more gray than brown now, and his eyes, quiet, observant, seemed to look through the world rather than at it. Most people in Denton knew him simply as the Eggman or the Goat Guy. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was never about himself. He sold fresh goat milk, farm eggs, and sometimes firewood when the winters turned cruel. No one asked where he came from or what he did before. In a town like Denton, people respected privacy, even if they didn't understand it. This morning, as he loaded his old F-150 with 2 coolers of eggs and a steel thermos of coffee, he flicked on the radio. The voice of a local DJ buzzed through the static. Big news, Denton. Preston Ward's Billionaire benefit tour is making a pit stop in Texas. The man behind Ward Capital is reportedly driving one of his vintage beauties through small towns to promote rural business. His 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 is making waves all the way from Georgia to California. He'll be just outside Denton today for a brunch gala in Dallas. Maybe we'll catch a glimpse if we're lucky. Jack let the words hang in the air as he turned the key. The old truck grumbled to life. Billionaires and Rolls-Royces, he muttered to himself with a dry chuckle. Wrong part of the world for that circus. He backed out slowly, past a barn whose paint had long since given up, past a broken windmill, and down the gravel path toward town. At Denton Auto Co-op, Marcy Davis was already elbow-deep in paperwork, grease, and caffeine. The garage doors were wide open, inviting the morning light into a shop filled with the sounds of ratchets clicking, air compressors hissing, and Caleb Torres singing off-key to a country station blaring over the speakers. Jack arrived as he did every Tuesday and Friday, pulling into the same gravel spot near the side entrance. Caleb gave a quick wave without looking up from under the hood of a Ford Ranger. "Morning, Goat Guy," he called out. Jack tipped his hat but said nothing as he stepped out of the truck. He carried a crate of eggs in each hand and a gallon of goat milk nestled in the crook of one arm. Marcy met him at the service counter. "You're early," she said with a smirk. "What, the goats let you off easy today?" "They were merciful," Jack replied, setting down the crates. "You need anything else?" "Nope, eggs and milk are plenty. Although, if you ever feel like fixing a carburetor, I won't stop you." Jack allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "I think I'd need hazard pay for that." Behind the service counter, Caleb chuckled. "Jack, fix a carb? Might as well ask him to fly a plane." Marcy grinned. "Hey, don't underestimate the Eggman." Caleb leaned back and nodded toward Jack's truck. "You got a whole mess of old stickers on that toolbox in your bed. SAE, GM Powertrain, Detroit Auto Expo. You collect those or something?" Jack didn't flinch. "Old life," he said simply. Marcy noticed the flicker in his eyes and changed the subject. "Tell your goats I said thanks." Later that morning, Jack sat on a folding chair just outside the shop, sipping black coffee from his thermos. His gaze wandered across the town's main street, where businesses like Wanda's Diner and Denton Feed Supply slowly stirred to life. But his ears remained tuned to the sounds drifting from the open garage, Caleb cursing softly, Marcy negotiating with a supplier, the occasional backfire from a misfiring engine. He didn't speak much, but Jack observed everything. Every now and then, his eyes would drift back to his toolbox in the truck bed. It was dented and weathered, coated in a thin film of dust and rust. But beneath the wear and tear were remnants of another life. Stickers from conferences, faded labels in neat handwriting, and a lock that had been replaced 3 times. If anyone had bothered to look closer, they'd have noticed something odd. The box wasn't a handyman's or farmer's toolbox. It was an engineer's. Inside, tucked beneath wrenches and bolts, were instruments most modern mechanics wouldn't recognize: calibration gauges from the 80s, hand-machined vacuum testers, and a polished micrometer that looked more at home in a laboratory than a farm truck. But nobody looked, nobody asked, and Jack never offered. He liked it that way. As the sun climbed higher, Jack closed his thermos, leaned back, and listened. In the distance, he thought he heard something unusual: the low, melodic hum of a V8, not like the work trucks and beaters that usually rolled through Denton. Something elegant, something expensive, and getting closer. The rumble came first. Low, rich, unmistakably refined. It wasn't the guttural grumble of a diesel pickup or the high whine of a modern sports car. It was something older, something regal. Jack Sullivan, still seated just outside the Denton Auto Co-op, sipping what was left of his lukewarm coffee, opened his eyes and tilted his head. That sound didn't belong here. Within moments, the unmistakable silhouette of a 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 glided into view, sunlight gleaming off its polished chrome grille and deep silver paint. The massive luxury vehicle moved like it was parting air itself, quiet and sure, commanding respect with every inch of its handcrafted British design. It looked so out of place in Denton, Texas, that time itself seemed to hiccup. Jack stood slowly, his cup forgotten, eyes narrowing slightly as the Phantom rolled to a stop in front of the shop's main bay. Inside, Caleb Torres leaned out from beneath a lifted Dodge Ram and nearly dropped his wrench. "What the—" Marcy Davis emerged from the back office, wiping grease from her hands onto a red shop towel. She froze in the doorway as the Rolls-Royce's driver door opened with a soft, expensive-sounding click. Preston Ward, immaculately dressed in a gray tailored suit with subtle pinstripes, stepped out as though descending from a private jet. His silver hair was combed back in precise waves. His shoes shined to mirror-like perfection. Every movement he made suggested control, wealth, and an expectation that the world would align itself with his needs. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. Instead, he waved a hand toward the vehicle as if presenting a gift. "The car needs immediate attention," he announced without greeting. She started hesitating about 40 miles back. Now she's sputtering at idle and kicking out black smoke under throttle. "I have a press brunch in Dallas at 1. That gives you exactly 1 hour." Marcy stepped forward, instinctively reaching for the clipboard at her hip. "Sir, welcome to Denton Auto Co-op. I'm Marcy, the owner. We'd be happy to take a look, but this isn't exactly a common—" "That's obvious," Preston interrupted, his voice calm but cutting. He gestured toward the surrounding lot, a mix of dusty pickup trucks, beat-up family sedans, and half-repaired tractors. "I was told this was the only reputable shop within 100 miles. We'll find out soon enough." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Word travels fast in small towns, and the appearance of a car that looked like it belonged in a James Bond movie had brought out the curious, the bored, and the Instagram-hungry. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and walked over, eyes locked on the Phantom V. "This is... wow. I mean, I've only ever seen one of these in a museum." Preston offered a tight smile. "She's been in the family for decades, all original, only driven by hand." Marcy looked the car over, noting the immaculate body, the sparkling wire wheels, and the gold-accented hood ornament. "You've had it serviced?" she asked. "Exclusively. Certified Rolls-Royce vintage mechanics. Last service was in Georgia 2 weeks ago. She ran fine until this morning." He pulled a thin leather folio from the passenger seat and handed it to her. Inside were maintenance logs, handwritten inspection notes, and copies of service records going back decades. Marcy glanced through them, nodding slowly. "We'll get started immediately." "You have 1 hour," Preston repeated. "I don't want excuses." I want results. If you can't fix it, I tow it to Dallas and file suit for lost time. Understand? The weight of his words dropped hard. Lawsuit. Over an hour delay? This wasn't just about a car. It was about power. Dominance. Marcy swallowed. Understood. She turned to Caleb. You're up. Caleb nodded, more eager than nervous. This was the kind of challenge that got his blood pumping. He gestured for another tech, Devon, to help push the Phantom into the bay. As they moved the car, Jack remained just outside, arms crossed, watching every movement with silent intensity. Jack had seen that car before. Not that specific one, perhaps, but the model. In another life, he'd once worked with the blueprints for the Phantom series, helped design the timing assemblies that made its V8 engine run like silk. He hadn't touched one in over 20 years. Inside the bay, Caleb popped the hood with care and reverence. The engine beneath looked more like a mechanical sculpture than a powertrain. Polished aluminum, braided lines, pristine carburetors. And it was all analog. No computer ports, no diagnostic screens. This was from an era when machines spoke in vibrations, not code. Where the hell do you even plug in a scanner? Devon muttered. You don't, Caleb replied, scratching his head. Outside, Preston stood beside Marcy, arms folded, expression unreadable. I take it this isn't something you see every day? He asked. Marcy shook her head. We're good with classics. Restored a 69 GTO last fall, but this... She exhaled. This is another world. Preston didn't smile. You have 56 minutes. Jack walked back to his truck and leaned against the tailgate, eyes still locked on the car. Under his breath, he murmured, It's not the carburetors. It's the vacuum draw on the advance valve. He took another sip of his now cold coffee and watched as two mechanics scratched their heads over a machine he knew more intimately than he'd known most people. And still, he said nothing. Not yet. Not until they'd need him. And Jack knew, from the way that engine coughed just slightly when rolling into the bay, they would. The giant steel bay doors of Denton Auto Co-op clattered shut behind the gleaming Rolls-Royce, muffling the hum of gossiping locals still lingering outside. Inside, however, the mood was shifting fast, from awe to urgency, and then to tension. Preston Ward stood just inside the shop, one polished loafer tapping against the concrete floor like a metronome of mounting impatience. His eyes swept the space with practiced scrutiny, landing on the stunned crew of mechanics who had gathered around his prized 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 like it was an alien spacecraft. Do you have someone who can actually work on this car? Preston's voice rang out sharp and clipped, cutting through the low murmur like a razor. Marcy Davis stepped up, wiping her hands on a rag tucked in her belt. We'll get on it immediately, Mr. Ward. Caleb here is our best. Caleb Torres gave a quick nod, exuding his usual bravado, but the tightness around his mouth betrayed the pressure. We'll get her diagnosed and running, he said, crouching toward the open hood as another mechanic, Charlie, grabbed a rolling tool cart. Preston checked his gold wristwatch. You have 56 minutes. My media appearance in Dallas won't wait. Caleb tried not to let that sink in as he leaned under the hood. The engine bay was immaculate, but everything about it felt foreign. The layout was tight and deliberate, far more surgical than anything he'd seen in a Ford or Chevy. The 6.2-liter V8 was hand-built and unlike anything Caleb had ever turned a wrench on. There were no electronic sensors, no plastic shrouds, no place to plug in a diagnostic computer. Charlie, already flipping through their Universal Scan Tools cable attachments, gave Caleb a wary glance. I don't see a port. There's gotta be one, Caleb muttered, yanking the Scan Tools OBD2 cable toward the driver's side and ducking under the dash. Nothing. He crawled over to the passenger side. Still nothing. This thing's pre-OBD, Charlie said, scratching his head. Probably pre-everything. It's 1964, Caleb growled, pulling out of the car. I forgot they made these without computers. Marcy appeared at their side, her eyes darting between them and Preston, who was now pacing near the front counter. What's going on? No interface, Caleb said. This thing doesn't talk to modern tools. It's all mechanical, like black magic and gears. So you're saying you can't diagnose it? Preston barked from across the shop. We didn't say that, Caleb called back, even though he was starting to sweat through his coveralls. We'll do it old school, sound, feel, visual inspection. Then do it, Preston snapped, folding his arms. I didn't bring this car to be admired. I brought it to be fixed. Charlie shot Caleb a look that said everything. We're in over our heads. Outside the circle of commotion, standing quietly near the back of the shop, Jack Sullivan kept sweeping. He pushed the broom in slow, deliberate strokes across the dusty floor. His head tilted slightly as the Rolls-Royce idled, his ears catching faint irregularities. The syncopated stutter of the engine, the inconsistent rumble on throttle, the faint whistle of air leaking where it shouldn't. But Jack didn't speak. Not yet. Back under the hood, Caleb had his stethoscope out and was poking around with a flashlight. It's got a hesitation under load, he muttered. Throttle linkage seems tight. Could be a timing issue. Maybe a vacuum leak. Charlie pointed at a set of gleaming triple carburetors. Those look synced, I think. But I don't know how to check without the old tools. What we need is Grandpa's toolbox, Caleb said, half joking. A crystal ball wouldn't hurt either. From the far end of the shop, Marcy called out, We've got some vintage stuff in the back. My dad kept everything. Checked the cabinet next to the tire balancer. Caleb went sprinting. Time was bleeding out fast. Jack leaned on his broom, his eyes still on the car. He took a half step forward, closer, as if the engine's hiccups were telling him something no one else could hear. Preston stalked past him without a glance, heading back toward the front office. Unbelievable, he muttered under his breath. Should have known better than to trust a goat town with a $500,000 car. Jack's lip twitched. He kept sweeping. Back at the cabinet, Caleb dug through layers of dust and spiderwebs until he found an old wooden box lined with velvet. Inside were brass vacuum gauges, a set of timing lights, and, miraculously, a carburetor synchronizer labeled Lucas Tuning Kit. Got something, he shouted, holding the box overhead. Back at the car, Caleb and Charlie started hooking up hoses and gauges, but it was clear they were guessing. Caleb tested vacuum pressure, but the readings danced unpredictably. This thing's got leaks somewhere, but I can't isolate them, he hissed. Nothing adds up. 10 minutes gone. Preston checked his watch again. What's the holdup now? Charlie stammered. We're narrowing it down. You mean you're throwing darts in the dark? Preston's tone had cooled, but now it was coated in ice. I'll give you 20 more minutes. After that, I'm calling a flatbed to haul this car to Dallas, and your Yelp reviews can enjoy the fallout. Marcy stood stiffly, trying to hold her composure. She knew how fast word spread in towns like Denton. One social media post from Preston Ward, and her reputation could be shredded by sunset. Caleb leaned on the fender, staring at the engine in frustration. It's gotta be a chain reaction of issues. Timing, fuel-air ratio, vacuum pressure, but it's like the engine's fighting us. Because we're using the wrong playbook, Charlie muttered. Jack, still hovering a few steps away, couldn't stay silent anymore. He walked over slowly, leaned slightly over the fender, and said, almost in a whisper, That front carb's pulling too lean. Listen to the pitch. It rises when you snap the throttle. Caleb jerked his head around. Excuse me? Jack straightened up, brushing his hands on his jeans. And she's got a slight hesitation at 2,000 RPM. That's timing. But not electrical. It's a mechanical advance issue. Diaphragm's probably got a tear. The garage fell silent. Marcy blinked. Charlie's wrench slipped out of his hand and clanged to the floor. Preston turned, eyes narrowed. Who the hell are you? Jack held his gaze, calm as stone. Nobody important. Just a man who knows how that engine thinks. Then he picked up his broom and walked away, resuming his sweeping like nothing had happened. Caleb stood frozen. Charlie looked at Marcy. Marcy looked at the car, and the purr of the Rolls-Royce's engine continued its uneven song, each sputter now sounding a little more like a question, begging for the right answer. The tension in the shop crackled like static electricity, heavy in the air, and charged with a blend of urgency and embarrassment. Preston Ward paced near the entrance, like a storm cloud in a tailored suit, his Rolex glinting with each irritated flick of his wrist. Caleb Torres was hunched over the engine, his fingers smudged with grease and desperation. eyes darting between manuals and malfunctioning gauges like a man trying to read tea leaves in a tornado. Marcy Davis stood at the edge of the bay, arms crossed tight against her chest, biting the inside of her cheek. She watched Caleb scramble while the second mechanic, Joe, leaned into the Rolls-Royce's open hood with an expression that screamed, "This is above our pay grade." The whispers from the small crowd outside filtered in like wind through an open window. Is it true that car's worth more than this whole block? I heard he's suing them if it's not fixed in an hour. No way they can handle that old British beast here. The pressure was mounting by the second. Then, like the soft scrape of a chair across a church floor, came the unexpected sound of boots stepping forward. Jack Sullivan. He moved out from the shadows of the corner, where he'd been quietly sipping from a thermos. His gait was unhurried, calm, but sure. He set the thermos down on a dusty rolling cart and cleared his throat softly. Caleb didn't even turn. Preston didn't bother glancing his way. Only Marcy's eyes followed the man in the weathered Carhartt jacket as he stepped into the fluorescent glow of the engine bay. I think I know what's wrong, Jack said. Silence. Caleb turned first, a puzzled scowl forming beneath his dark, sweaty bangs. What? Jack repeated it, steady, unemotional. I think I can fix it. Preston finally looked up from his phone, his face a curious mix of amusement and disbelief. I'm sorry, who are you again? He's the egg guy, someone mumbled near the shop entrance. Jack offered a short nod. Name's Jack Sullivan. I'm the farmer just outside of town. Brought in eggs and goat milk this morning. Preston laughed, a short, sharp chuckle, as if the universe had just told him a particularly stupid joke. Well, unless your goats are certified Rolls-Royce technicians, I think we're past the point of hobby advice. Jack didn't flinch. Give me 1 hour, I'll fix it. If I can't, I'll never set foot near an engine again. Caleb blinked. You're serious? Dead serious, Jack said, eyes locked on the gleaming beast before him. I'm not guessing. I know this engine. Marcy stepped in, alarm flashing behind her concern. Jack, I appreciate the offer, but this is a big liability. This isn't some Ford pickup we're talking about. This is a hand-built luxury machine worth more than every car in this shop combined. I'm aware, Jack said evenly, and I know exactly what's wrong with it. The tension broke into murmurs and skeptical chuckles. One of the older locals outside whispered, Has he lost his damn mind? Preston crossed his arms. Let's say, purely hypothetically, that I let you touch this car. What's in it for you? Jack met his eyes. Nothing if I fail, but if I fix it, you admit I was right. Publicly. Preston smirked. You want an ego trip? No, Jack replied. I want your respect. The shop went still. Even the rattling of the overhead fan seemed to pause for dramatic effect. Preston let out a breath, then grinned wide. All right, farmer, fix it. Let's make it interesting. If you fix it within the hour, I'll write this shop a check for $30,000 on the spot. But if you fail, not only do you walk away from this engine forever, you walk out of here and don't come back. Ever. Marcy turned sharply. Now hold on. This is my shop. I accept, Jack cut in before she could finish. His voice held no hesitation, no bravado, just calm certainty. Preston's eyebrows rose. You accept? No counter, no negotiating. That's a lot of pressure for someone who, until 5 minutes ago, was selling dairy. Jack just gave her a look, not evasive, not smug, just steady. Preston turned to Marcy. Lady, you better pray this guy's the real deal, because if he messes up my car... But Marcy didn't answer, because deep down, somewhere between disbelief and fear, she was starting to wonder, what if he is the real deal? The shop was dead quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the subtle creak of the cooling engine. Jack's words hung in the air like the heavy scent of oil and metal, defying belief. Everyone in Denton Auto Co-op had heard what he said. 1 hour, fix the unfixable, or walk away forever. And he meant it. Marcy broke the silence first, stepping between Jack and Preston like a mother shielding a child from traffic. Jack, don't, she said, her voice low but firm. You don't owe anyone anything. This isn't your burden. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all him. Jack met her gaze, calm and steady. I'm not doing this for him, he said, nodding slightly toward Preston. I'm doing this for me. Marcy frowned, arms crossed. You could lose everything, your livelihood, your place here. Jack smiled gently. Marcy, for 5 years, I've been hiding behind goats and egg cartons. If I walk away from this, I'm not just losing a bet. I'm proving that I really am just a farmer, and I know I'm more than that. It's time. Preston, who had been quietly enjoying the dramatic tension like an executive producer watching his favorite daytime soap unfold, clapped his hands once. Well then, he said brightly, if we're all in agreement, let's make it official. He grabbed a napkin from the shop's cluttered coffee station, pulled out a silver pen from his inside jacket pocket, and began to write. You've got to be kidding me, Caleb muttered under his breath. Preston scribbled with deliberate flair. If Jack Sullivan restores the proper function of the 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 engine within 1 hour, I, Preston Ward, agree to pay Denton Auto Co-op the sum of $30,000. If he fails, Mr. Sullivan will permanently relinquish any claim to mechanical consultation or work within this shop. He flourished his signature at the bottom, then looked at Jack. Do we have a deal, Mr. Sullivan? Jack nodded, took the pen, and signed just beneath Preston's name, in smaller, neater handwriting. The napkin was pinned to the corkboard near the shop's calendar with a pushpin that held up birthday reminders and coupons from the feed store. It looked absurd, but everyone in the room knew this napkin might become legendary. Jack turned, walked over to the back corner of the shop, and opened the bed of his faded green Ford pickup. The tailgate squeaked as it lowered, revealing a long, weather-worn toolbox that bore the scars of a life well lived. It wasn't shiny, or new, or fancy, but when Jack popped it open, the contents made Caleb's jaw slacken. Nestled inside were tools that had clearly been cared for like family heirlooms. Custom-fitted foam lined the interior. Each socket, wrench, and micrometer had its own place. The tools gleamed, not with polish, but with use. Real use, hands-on, grease and sweat, engineering lab to factory floor kind of use. Jack gently lifted a precision timing light, then a brass carburetor balancing gauge, its dials still sharp and unmarred by time. Next came a weathered but pristine set of British Standard spanners, tools so rare most mechanics under 30 wouldn't even recognize them. Marcy blinked. Those look museum grade. Jack smiled. They're mine. Some of them go back 30 years. Caleb stepped closer, curiosity overcoming pride. Where'd you even get all this? Jack didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the Rolls-Royce, set his toolbox down like a surgeon preparing for an operation, and began laying out the tools in perfect order. He wasn't just putting on a show. Each tool placement was calculated, specific, purposeful. Caleb watched closely. Jack's hands didn't move like a farmer's. They moved like someone who'd spent thousands of hours inside engine bays, turning theories into motion. There was grace in the motion, and muscle memory behind the details. The tension in the shop shifted. People began to murmur. Even the skeptical bystanders who had wandered in from the street now watched with growing interest. It was like watching a lion emerge from sheep's clothing. Preston leaned against the Rolls-Royce, arms folded, amused, but clearly curious now. You've got some nice toys, Sullivan. Hope you know how to use them. Jack glanced at him and said nothing, but the look in his eyes said plenty. The countdown had unofficially begun. Jack took one last breath, cracked his knuckles, and rolled up his sleeves. Behind him, the shop was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. 1 hour, $30,000 on the line. And the truth about who Jack Sullivan really was. The bet was on. Jack Sullivan peeled off his flannel shirt and tossed it gently onto the nearest stool, revealing forearms roped with the kind of sinew you don't get from typing or lifting weights, but from years of pushing feed carts, loading hay bales, and turning wrenches long before goats and isolation became his daily reality. He rolled up the sleeves of his worn thermal undershirt, the elbows frayed, and the cotton sun-bleached from too many Texas summers. His calloused hands reached down into the open bay of the 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 like he'd done this every day of his life. Only, No one in the shop had ever seen him do anything more technical than refill a tire on his beat-up farm truck. But something about Jack's presence shifted the atmosphere of Denton Auto Co-op. The air grew still. Even the small crowd outside the bay, locals, farmers, and hangers-on, stopped murmuring. He didn't reach for tools right away. Number. He leaned in, tilted his head, and just listened. The shop's buzz, once fueled by frantic motion and panicked improvisation, slowed to match Jack's quiet rhythm. His fingers brushed along the intake manifold, tracing the seams like he was reading Braille. Then they moved to the carburetor base, hovering above the air horn, barely grazing the throttle linkage. His fingertips tapped the distributor cap, not to move it, but to feel the tremble beneath it. He reached down by the vacuum advance unit and pressed 2 fingers softly on the diaphragm housing. He nodded slightly. Once. Marcy stood near the edge of the bay, arms crossed, chewing the edge of a thumbnail she'd bitten raw over the years. Caleb had gone stone still next to the tool chest, socket wrench dangling in one hand like he was watching something sacred unfold. Jack murmured, "Timing's off. Maybe 10 degrees. No, more. Feels like the vacuum advance isn't engaging under idle." Caleb blinked. "You can tell that just by feel?" Jack didn't answer. He just moved his hand to the twin SU carburetors, then sniffed near the air filter housing, narrowing his eyes. "Rear carb's running lean," he muttered. "Front's too rich. They tried compensating one for the other. Rookie move." Caleb looked at Marcy like he was staring at a ghost. She looked back the same way. Then Jack's fingers paused, right over the base gasket. He pulled them back and smelled the tips. "There it is. Vacuum leak. Old gasket's probably dry rotted." He stepped back from the car and exhaled, almost like it hurt. Not physically, but emotionally, like some long-buried part of himself had just peeked out after years of silence. And just like that, the past broke in. Detroit, 1998. Flashbulbs popped in the ballroom of the Renaissance Center downtown. A younger Jack Sullivan stood on stage, suited sharp in a custom-tailored dark gray that somehow looked both expensive and humble. He wasn't smiling wide, never had been that kind of man, but there was pride in the way he accepted the engraved glass award from the Society of Automotive Engineers. Outstanding innovation in combustion efficiency, it read. Back then, Jack was the golden boy of the auto world, the engineer's engineer, the guy who didn't just understand engines, he felt them. Like a conductor with a symphony, he could listen to one cylinder misfire and know if it was valve lash, timing drift, or a microfracture in the distributor. People talked about Jack in the halls at GM and Chrysler like he was some kind of oracle. Executives shook his hand with 2 hands, interns whispered about his projects like they were folklore, and then, like a match burning bright, he was gone. A scandal, a leak, a tragic loss. Everyone had a different version. But one day, Jack was on the cover of industry magazines, and the next, he was just a ghost drifting between small towns, carrying a toolbox no one understood anymore. Back in Denton, the scent of old gas and hand-cut metal pulled Jack back into the present. "I need a flathead, 1/4 inch wide, and a vacuum gauge set. If you've got one," Jack said, his voice calm. Caleb blinked out of his haze. Yeah, I think. We've got an old Snap-on set, somewhere in the back." Marcy jumped into motion. "I'll check my dad's old cabinet. He had gauges like that when this place worked on muscle cars." Jack gave a faint nod, then turned back to the car and placed both hands on the edge of the engine bay, like he was centering himself. His breathing slowed, his shoulders squared. The Phantom's massive V8 loomed like a sleeping beast under the flickering shop lights. It wasn't just a car, it was a puzzle, a song slightly off-key. And Jack knew how to tune it. Caleb brought back the vacuum gauge. Jack inspected it and nodded with approval. "This'll do." He adjusted the tool like he was putting on an old pair of gloves, then connected it to the manifold. The needle danced, jittering just slightly past the expected idle range. Jack tapped the gauge once. The needle settled, off by about 5 inches of mercury, just enough to make the Phantom cough instead of purr. He looked to Preston, who had leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching this unfold with the kind of skepticism a man gains after decades of business deals and broken promises. Jack held his gaze for a beat, then turned back to the engine. He whispered under his breath, but loud enough for Caleb and Marcy to hear. "Somewhere in here is the music. Just got to clear out the noise." He reached for his own tools. They weren't the chrome-plated sets like Caleb's. Jack's were hand-worn, each wrapped in soft leather cloth, labeled in his own blocky handwriting. Float Ag, Vac Test, Timing Bar. Some of them were antiques, gauges with analog needles, brass fittings with cloth-wrapped hoses, screwdrivers with hardwood handles. Caleb couldn't stop staring. "You weren't always a farmer," he said quietly. Jack didn't answer. He just smirked a little and went back to work. One by one, he began isolating systems, pulling plugs, feeling the heat from the exhaust ports. He turned each carburetor screw with the soft touch of a man tuning a guitar. Marcy returned with a cardboard box full of her father's tools. "Anything in here help?" Jack peeked inside, found a brass synchronization gauge older than Caleb, and nodded. "That'll do just fine." The shop, once chaos, had become something else entirely. Everyone moved slower now, not out of uncertainty, but reverence, like watching a master work. Caleb leaned against the counter, murmuring, "He's diagnosing stuff with his damn hands. Who does that anymore?" Preston, arms still crossed, now leaned forward just slightly. Marcy didn't speak. Her eyes followed Jack's every movement. Something was stirring deep in her gut, a mix of awe, respect, and an almost painful sense of hope. The clock kept ticking, but nobody dared interrupt. Jack continued, one adjustment at a time, breathing life back into a machine no one else could understand. And as the minutes slipped away, a strange thing happened in Denton Auto Co-op. Doubt started turning into belief. The rhythmic purr of the Rolls-Royce had devolved into an uneven grumble. Inside the Denton Auto Co-op, the air was thick, not with smoke or fumes, but with silence. The kind of silence that arrives when something unexpected is happening, and no one wants to break it. Jack Sullivan stood by the engine bay, sleeves rolled, grease already streaked across his forearms. The sun had climbed higher outside, casting long shadows through the open garage door, as if the whole town was holding its breath. Marcy and Caleb hovered close, their expressions a blend of confusion and curiosity. Even Preston Ward, the billionaire with polished shoes and a Rolex made for Swiss royalty, had stopped pacing. His hands were in his pockets now, his eyes locked on Jack. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was watching. Jack didn't rush. He traced a finger along a line of the vacuum tubing, listening again to the idle. It stuttered, a hiccup just shy of rhythm, then a small gasp from the rear exhaust, followed by the softest tremor in the frame. He finally looked up. "This thing's talking," he said plainly. "Y'all just ain't listening close enough." Caleb blinked. "You're saying the car's telling us what's wrong?" Jack nodded. "Always does. Most folks just try to plug a computer in, wait for numbers. But old girls like this, they speak in shakes and smells and sounds." Marcy, arms crossed and skeptical but no longer dismissive, raised an eyebrow. "So tell me what it's saying." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "It's got three things going on. Any one of them would throw you off. But all three together? It's a magician's trick. Sleight of hand. You're looking one way while the real trouble's sneaking in the back." He stepped to the side and motioned toward the engine. "First, you got a sputtering idle. Not random. It's rhythmic. That's a timing issue, plain as day. But not enough to throw a code if it had a computer. Just enough to make the ride feel like it's got asthma." Caleb glanced at the engine, then back at Jack. "Second," Jack continued, "you got a lean rear carburetor. Listen close when it revs. Rear cylinder's not getting enough fuel. That's why there's a little pop in the pipe. Not constant, but just enough under load." Caleb leaned down, listening again. "I thought that was just a misfire." "Nope. Misfires don't pulse like that. That's air starvation. Somebody's been tweaking that rear carb, trying to fix the idle, and now it's out of sync." "And the third?" Marcy asked. Jack looked her dead in the eye. "Vacuum leak. Small, but it's throwing off the whole advance curve. Engine's not adjusting right under load. That's why it hesitates when you hit the throttle hard." Preston crossed his arms. "Three separate problems. working together to make one big mess. Exactly, Jack said. It's like trying to fix a chair with one leg shorter than the rest, but the floor's uneven and the seat's cracked too. Fix one, and the others get worse unless you know the whole picture. Caleb shook his head in disbelief. That's why nothing we tried worked. Every time we adjusted something, it got worse somewhere else. Jack nodded slowly. Because you were treating symptoms, not the cause. Marcy leaned against the tool cabinet, the weight of it all settling in her eyes. So, how do we fix it? Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of notepaper. We need some tools, old ones. Caleb glanced at the paper. Like what? Jack handed it to Marcy. On it, written in tight block letters, was a list that looked like it had been scrawled in the 1970s. Caleb read over her shoulder. I've heard of maybe 2 of those, maybe. Marcy furrowed her brow. Those aren't on our shelf. Jack looked around the shop. You said your daddy ran this place before you. Yeah. He was old school? The oldest. Then I'd bet money he kept every tool he ever touched. Might be buried in the back, under a pile of junk. But if he worked on old Mustangs or Triumphs, or even the occasional Jag, he had what we need. Marcy chewed her lip. We've got a storeroom. I haven't gone through most of it since he passed. Well, Jack said with a quiet smile, now's the time. She hesitated for a beat, then turned on her heel. Come on, Caleb. Caleb followed her toward the back of the shop, down a narrow hallway to a room that hadn't been opened in months. Dust coated the doorknob like talcum powder. Marcy shoved it open, coughing as a cloud of age swept out. Inside was a mess of old parts, busted fenders, half-gutted toolboxes, and crates stacked high like forgotten treasure chests. Start digging, she said. Back in the bay, Jack leaned against the fender of the Rolls-Royce. Preston approached, face unreadable. You know, Preston said, I've had this car for 10 years. Took her to specialists in San Francisco and Boston. Had British-trained guys put their hands on her. None of them ever mentioned a triple fault diagnosis like that. Jack didn't blink. They weren't listening either. Preston looked at him for a long moment. You're not a farmer. I am now, Jack replied. But you weren't. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back toward the engine and peered in again. He tapped gently along the manifold, listening. He adjusted a small hose and sniffed. A faint hiss changed pitch. There it is, he muttered, split right at the base of the junction. That's your leak. Just then, Marcy and Caleb returned, both carrying old metal cases that looked like they belonged in a museum. Marcy set one down on the workbench and popped the clasps. Inside were gauges, analog, needle sweeping, brass rimmed. Found the carb sink and the vac gauge, she said, brushing off a cobweb. Caleb grinned. We even found an old timing light, like the one in your list. Still works. Jack exhaled. Perfect. Preston narrowed his eyes. So what's next? Jack reached for the sink tool. Next, we make this lady purr again. And for the first time since he walked into the shop that morning, Preston didn't offer a challenge or a threat. He simply stepped back and listened. The tension in the Denton Auto Co-op was so thick you could slice it with a torqued wrench. Jack Sullivan, now stripped of his flannel and standing in a plain black t-shirt rolled tight at the sleeves, was hunched over the gleaming hood of the 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 like a seasoned surgeon prepping for a high-stakes operation. The shop's radio had been turned off. No one dared speak above a whisper. The ticking clock on the wall was the loudest sound in the room, besides the occasional clink of a tool being placed down with absolute precision. Jack worked with a kind of grace that wasn't flashy. It was exact. Every move he made had a reason. Every tool he reached for, every bolt he loosened, every adjustment he made. It was like watching someone play a piano, but instead of notes, it was combustion ratios and timing gears. Caleb stood beside him, at first tense and skeptical, now completely in awe. The young mechanic had always been confident, cocky even, but that had taken a back seat. He was watching a master at work. Jack didn't bark orders or slow down to explain in full sentences, but the way he nodded, the slight gestures, the unspoken language of true technicians, It pulled Caleb in like gravity. "Wrench, 9/16", Jack said softly, not even looking up. Caleb handed it over without hesitation. "You see that linkage?" Jack continued, nodding toward the rear carburetor as he disconnected a hose. "That throttle cable's got a tension variance. That's what's throwing the timing off when it ramps." Caleb nodded, eyes wide. "I would have never thought to check that." "Most wouldn't," Jack said, adjusting the float level on the rear carb with a tiny brass screwdriver. "But you learn what to listen for. That click, that ain't just metal rubbing. That's imbalance." On the far side of the shop, Marcy stood with her arms folded, biting the inside of her lip. She'd never seen anything like this. Jack wasn't guessing. He wasn't experimenting. He was fixing, calmly, efficiently. She'd run this shop for over a decade and had seen plenty of solid mechanics come and go, but what she was witnessing now didn't belong in any garage. This was artistry. Preston Ward leaned silently against the fender of a dusty Ford, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with his signature calculating stare. His suit jacket hung from the hook on the wall. His sleeves were rolled, tie loosened. The billionaire was still impatient, but now he was invested. He hadn't said a word since the hour started, but the furrow in his brow had softened. He wasn't just looking at Jack. He was studying him. "Fuel-air ratio on the front carb's off by 12%, Jack muttered, adjusting the needle valve. Whoever last tuned this was guessing. Jack didn't hesitate. He synced the dual carburetors using a set of analog synchronization gauges Caleb had never even seen before. Ancient tools from an era before computers ruled the engine bay. Brass-faced dials flickered with precision, tubes hissing gently as pressure was equalized. It looked prehistoric, and it worked like magic. Sweat beaded at Jack's temples, not from stress, but from the relentless focus. He checked and rechecked timing marks, then reassembled the vacuum advance housing with an almost religious care, making sure the new diaphragm seated perfectly. Every gasket he touched, he treated like glass. He glanced at the clock. 18 minutes remaining. "All right," Jack exhaled, straightening up. "Caleb, hit the ignition. Don't touch the throttle." Caleb moved like he was defusing a bomb. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, then settled into a low, purring idle, so smooth it was like butter melting on a skillet. The sound reverberated through the shop in stunned silence. It didn't sputter. It didn't growl. It purred. Preston stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do that again." Caleb shut it off and started it once more. Same result. The engine fired instantly and ran as though it had just rolled off the line in Crewe, England, 1964. Marcy looked like she might cry. Caleb stepped back, mouth slightly open. "No way," he whispered. "That's not possible." Jack said nothing. He just leaned over and fine-tuned the idle screw half a turn. Preston gave a nod. Not of approval, but of recognition. He'd seen brilliance before, in boardrooms, in architects, in investment strategists, but never in a goat farmer from Denton. 15 minutes to spare, Jack said, finally speaking up. "She's running cleaner now than she probably has in decades." Marcy walked up to him, slow, cautious, like approaching a wild animal. "Jack," she whispered, What are you?" Jack looked at her, eyes calm but piercing. "Just a guy who used to know engines." The shop erupted in quiet awe. Jimmy, the young kid who handled tire changes, let out a long breath. Preston just nodded to himself, lips pursed in grudging admiration. "Hell of a show," he muttered, and the clock kept ticking. But everyone in that garage knew the real countdown had ended the moment Jack turned the key. He wasn't the goat guy anymore. He was the man who fixed the impossible, and the town of Denton would never see him the same way again. Jack stood still for a second, letting the silence settle. He wiped his hands slowly with a rag that had seen better days, oil-stained, frayed at the corners, but soft, with time and use. His movements were unhurried, almost reverent. Then he looked up from the Rolls-Royce and simply said, "She's done." The words didn't boom. They didn't need to. Spoken with calm certainty, they cut through the tension in the shop like a knife through taut wire. For a long beat, no one moved. Preston Ward stood motionless, his hands curled into impatient fists by his sides, and then something shifted in him. Something subtle, but real. His posture loosened, if only a notch. He took one measured step toward the car, then another. The glossy hood reflected his movements as he approached with a wary curiosity, like a man about to touch a priceless artifact. Preston opened the door and slid into the leather driver's seat of his 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom V. The interior, untouched by time, still held that unmistakable old-world scent. Fine leather, aged wood, and the quiet ghost of cigars, smoked on long-forgotten summer evenings. But the air now felt different, charged. Jack stepped back, giving Preston space, but his eyes never left the machine. Neither did anyone else's. The shop had fallen into a hush, the kind usually reserved for eulogies or wedding vows. Even Caleb had stopped fiddling with the torque wrench in his hand, his eyes fixed on the steering wheel, like it might reveal some cosmic secret. Preston slid the key into the ignition slot and paused for half a second, almost like he was mentally preparing himself for disappointment. Then he turned it. The engine roared to life with a deep, confident purr. No sputter, no hesitation, just an elegant growl that slid smoothly into a silky idle. It wasn't just running, it was singing. The tone was clean even, and perfect, like a well-tuned cello being played by a master. It filled the shop, bounced off the concrete walls, and washed over the crowd that had started to gather at the bay doors. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by something even rarer in a garage full of grease-streaked locals. Applause. Honest, spontaneous applause. Preston didn't move. His hands rested lightly on the wheel, his jaw slack with disbelief. He revved the engine once, slowly. The acceleration was smooth, powerful, restrained only by his foot's unwillingness to ruin perfection. His brows knitted into something that wasn't frustration anymore. It was awe. Outside the shop, someone let out a cheer. Word had traveled fast through the town. Too fast, really. And now a small group had gathered, peeking in through the open garage doors, some still clutching coffee mugs or grocery bags. One older man leaned on a cane and wiped his eyes, though no one dared mention it. Marcy stood by the workbench, arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed together like she was holding something in. Her eyes were glassy, shining. When Jack said, "She's done," it had hit her like a thunderclap. 5 years he'd worked here, 5 years of quiet sweeping and polite nods. She'd always thought he was just a tired man escaping a hard past. But now it was like watching a ghost come back to life. A ghost who just rewired your most prized possession without breaking a sweat. "You okay?" Caleb asked her in a low voice. Marcy blinked fast and laughed a little through her nose. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting that." Jack stood off to the side, wiping his palms clean with the same rag, eyes cast down. He didn't look proud. He looked free, like someone who'd been carrying a weight for years and had finally set it down. Preston finally stepped out of the car, the engine still humming behind him like a satisfied lion. He closed the door gently, no slam, just a soft click that echoed like a period at the end of a sentence. "I've had this car for 15 years, he said, his voice lower now, no longer clipped and imperious. "It's been serviced by Rolls-Royce certified teams in London, New York, and LA, and not once has it ever sounded like that." Jack nodded but didn't speak. Preston turned toward him fully, eyeing the man up and down as if seeing him for the first time. The khaki work pants, the faded white undershirt, the old toolbox with hand-labeled compartments. It all painted a picture completely at odds with the mastery he had just witnessed. "How did you know?" Preston asked, his voice curious now, not combative. "You didn't use a single scan tool. No scope, no laptop, just that." Jack looked up. "Sometimes you don't need all that. You just need to listen. These old girls will tell you what's wrong if you know what to hear." That answer should have been smug or cryptic, but it wasn't. It was humble, almost tired, and something in Preston softened even further. "Well," he said, stepping toward Jack and offering a hand, "whatever you did, it's nothing short of miraculous." Jack hesitated, then shook it. A firm, honest grip, the kind that says more than a dozen words could. Behind them, Caleb stood frozen. He'd just watched a man strip away every doubt with nothing more than a wrench and a steady hand. In less than an hour, Jack had taught him more about mechanics, and maybe about humility, than he'd learned in years of schooling and shop work. "I ain't never seen anything like that," Caleb mumbled. "Me neither," said Marcy, her voice thick but steady. "But I think we all just did." Outside, the crowd clapped again, as Preston gave a brief wave and nodded. Word would spread fast about the farmer, the bet, the miracle repair. Denton hadn't seen anything like it, and they wouldn't forget it anytime soon. Jack, meanwhile, returned to his toolbox and quietly started organizing his tools, one by one, wiping each one down before slotting it back into its labeled compartment, like he'd just finished a normal day's work. But everyone watching knew nothing about this day was normal, and it wasn't over yet. The shop was still buzzing with disbelief and admiration when the engine finally settled into its velvety idle. Jack stood back from the car, his work boots scuffed, hands stained with oil and old grease, a thin line of sweat darkening his collar. The once distant man now stood at the center of everything, the sun finally catching up to shine on a truth long buried. Preston Ward stood across from him, lips slightly parted, staring not just at the machine, but at the man who'd brought it back to life. The sleek, silver Rolls-Royce purred like it had never known struggle, its idle, steady, exhaust whisper silent. For the first time in years, the old car ran, not just correctly, but beautifully, like it had been waiting for Jack Sullivan, and only him. The billionaire circled the car slowly, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete as he leaned in, checking details most people wouldn't notice, timing consistency, throttle response, even the tailpipe emissions. Then, without a word, he looked up and walked directly toward Jack. "What's your name again?" Preston asked, voice low but commanding. "Jack Sullivan," he replied evenly, wiping his hands with a rag and folding it calmly. Preston paused. "Jack Sullivan." He repeated it like he was testing the name against a memory, chewing over the weight of it. "Tell me, who are you really?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Jack's gaze didn't flinch. His eyes were steady but worn, like someone who had carried too much for too long. Then came the answer, simple, honest, and enough to silence the shop. "I used to build these," Jack said. "Then life happened." Silence. Preston's brow lifted slightly, not with surprise, but with understanding. For a moment, the commanding businessman just stared, nodding slightly to himself like pieces were clicking into place. "Well, Jack," Preston said, straightening his blazer, "if that's what you used to do, then I think I've got something you might want to start doing again." He turned, walked over to his car, pulled out a monogrammed leather folio from the back seat, and returned with a slim card and a printed offer letter. He extended both. "I own 43 vehicles in my private collection," Preston began, "every one of them older than this beauty, some worth more than 10 houses. I've been searching for someone with your skill set for over 5 years. Most know how to turn wrenches, but few understand machines like you do. You don't just fix them, you speak their language." He handed over the card and the letter. "I want you in Oklahoma City. Full relocation. $200,000 a year starting salary. Full benefits. Private workshop. Any tools or parts you need. No red tape, no committee approvals, no micromanaging. Just you, my collection, and the space to do what you clearly do better than anyone I've met." The offer hung in the air like a lightning strike. Jack took the papers in hand, but didn't look at them immediately. He stared past them, past Preston, his eyes falling on the people gathered behind the car. Caleb, hands still stained from earlier, looked like he was holding his breath. Marcy stood to one side, arms crossed over her chest, trying to appear neutral, but her knuckles were white from gripping too hard. Even a couple of locals, who had trickled in to watch the whole scene unfold, stood frozen, like they were waiting to hear whether the town would lose something, or someone great. Jack finally looked down at the letter. His eyes scanned it quickly. Terms, benefits, perks. It was a dream job by any standard. A rescue rope dangled from above, begging to lift him out of the dust of the past 5 years. But he didn't say yes. Instead, he folded the letter, tucked the card in his shirt pocket, and looked up at Marcy, at her grease-smudged face, her weather-worn shop, her father's tools still lining the walls. Then he looked at Caleb. The young mechanic was practically vibrating with energy, shifting his weight back and forth on his heels. "You're not done here," Caleb said, breaking the silence. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You just started something." Jack met his eyes. For a moment, neither man said anything more. But in that look, across decades of difference, there was a spark. The same spark Jack had once carried into the engineering labs of Detroit. The one he'd buried when he lost his wife. The one he thought had burned out forever. But it was back now, flickering again. Alive. "You really believe that?" Jack asked, a quiet smile tugging the corner of his mouth. "Yeah," Caleb said. "We all do." Marcy stepped forward. "You don't have to decide right now," she said, though her voice betrayed a fragile hope. "But I'd be lying if I said we wouldn't miss you if you left. What you did today, what you showed us, it wasn't just fixing a car. You reminded us who we are, what this place can be." Jack glanced at the car once more. The machine he'd just restored was perfect, but perfection, he realized, didn't mean completion. He turned back to Preston. "That's a generous offer, really," Jack said with sincerity. "But I've got something to think about." Preston studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Take your time, but don't take too long," he added with a small smirk. "Talent like yours shouldn't be shelved again." "I won't," Jack said, slipping the folded offer into his back pocket. Preston looked around the shop. "This place has heart, but heart only gets you so far. That man there," he nodded toward Jack, "deserves a workshop as fine as his mind. Whether it's mine or yours, build it. Don't let that talent rot away in a barn." Jack watched Preston return to his car. The man didn't start it. He just sat there for a minute, staring at the dashboard like he was replaying the last hour in his head. Inside the shop, the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer about one man fixing a car. It was about possibility, growth, future. Jack turned to Marcy. "You said this place could be more? You really believe that?" "I believe we just saw proof," she said. Caleb grinned. "We could learn so much from you. You could build more than just engines here, Jack. You could build a legacy." The words landed heavy. Jack looked at his hands, still calloused, still dirty. But for the first time in years, they didn't feel like the hands of a man hiding from his past. They felt like hands ready to build again. He nodded slowly, as if making peace with something long buried. "I need some air," he said. "Gonna walk a bit, clear my head." Nobody stopped him. Nobody pushed. They simply let him go, knowing he wasn't walking away, just walking through something important. And as he stepped outside, into the Texas sun, one thing was clear. The next chapter of Jack Sullivan's life wasn't going to be written in Oklahoma City. It was going to be written right here, in a dusty shop, in a town that had unknowingly been keeping a legend hidden behind goat milk and worn flannel. Marcy waited until the shop quieted down, the hum of the freshly tuned Rolls-Royce, now just a soft purr in the background. The excitement of the moment still buzzed in the air like static before a storm, but her mind was already racing ahead. Jack stood off to the side near his toolbox, packing up his gauges with the same calm precision he had displayed during the repair. The rest of the shop slowly returned to its rhythm, though every glance still flicked toward him like he was some kind of living legend. She approached slowly, wiping her hands on a rag, her gaze focused, purposeful. "Jack," she said, her voice low, meant for him and no one else. "You got a minute?" He glanced up. "Sure." Marcy nodded toward the break room, and they stepped inside. The door swung closed behind them with a click, muffling the outside world. Inside, it was quiet, just the humming of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of ice melting in a forgotten glass. She didn't waste time. "Look, I know what Preston offered you out there. I saw your face. That kind of money, that kind of opportunity. It's a good deal," Jack admitted, resting against the edge of the counter. Marcy folded her arms. "It is, but it's not everything." Jack raised an eyebrow, curious but not defensive. She took a breath. "What if we did something here instead? You and me, Partners. We turn this place into a real classic restoration shop, not just oil changes and brake jobs anymore. I've got the property, the name, the team. You've got the skill, the vision. Together, we could make this something special. Jack looked at her, silent. Not dismissive, just weighing, measuring. We don't have the money, he said after a moment. Not yet, she said. But we've got the $30,000 coming from Preston. We've got equity in the land, equipment, and a whole community that just saw what you did. People will talk, Jack. This story's going to move faster than wildfire. That's free exposure. He stared down at his hands, the calluses, the small grease smudge still stuck under his fingernail. You don't even know if I want that kind of spotlight again. Maybe not, she said gently, but I think you want a purpose, and you had one out there today. I saw it. Everyone did. You didn't just fix a car. You taught Caleb. You inspired me. Hell, you even shut up Preston Ward. Jack let out a quiet chuckle. That was a first. Marcy stepped a little closer. I'm serious. We build something real here, something we own, something we can shape how we want. He looked up at her, his eyes thoughtful. For a long beat, they just stood there. Two people with grease under their nails and big dreams lodged in their chests. You'd really go into business with me? Jack asked. I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't sure, she said simply. I've been running this place by myself for a long time. Maybe it's time to stop doing it alone. Before he could reply, a knock rapped gently on the doorframe. It was Preston Ward, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Hope I'm not interrupting, the billionaire said with surprising humility. Figured you both could use a refill. Marcy stepped back, giving Jack space to speak. Preston offered him a cup. Jack accepted it, nodding in thanks. I caught part of that last conversation, Preston said, eyes darting between them. Interesting proposition? Ambitious. It's not a done deal, Jack said cautiously. No, Preston nodded. But it should be, Jack blinked. Excuse me? Preston set his own coffee down on the nearby table. Look, Jack, I'm a businessman. I've built companies, sold companies, invested in things that failed, and some that made me richer than I could have imagined. I know value when I see it. He looked around the modest break room at the peeling linoleum, the old vending machine humming in the corner. This place doesn't look like much, but what I saw out there, what everyone saw, was the birth of something new. You've got the skill. Marcy's got the operation. Together, you've got something special. So you're rescinding your offer? Jack asked slowly. Not at all, Preston smiled. I'm improving it. What if I made your shop, this shop, my exclusive restoration partner? You build the team, upgrade your tools, expand however you see fit. I'll send you the cars, cover the costs up front. It's not just about money, Jack. It's about legacy. Jack looked at Marcy. Her eyes were wide, but not in disbelief, more like cautious hope. That's a big risk, Jack said. That's business, Preston replied, but I think this one's worth betting on. Jack leaned back, sipping the coffee. It was stronger than he liked it, but it was real, bitter, bold, undeniable, like the choice before him. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. You're offering us funding, cars, and credibility. We keep control. We build it here. Exactly. And if it fails, I'll take the hit. But I don't think it will. Jack looked down at the coffee again, then at Marcy, then through the door, where Caleb and the rest of the crew were gathered, talking, buzzing with new energy. He looked back at Preston. I'll need to think about it. Take your time, Preston said, but not too long. You've already started something. People are watching, and momentum doesn't last forever. Preston walked out, leaving the two of them in silence again. Marcy let out a long breath. Well, that just happened? Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, it did. He looked around the break room once more, then at her. We better get to work. Her smile grew slowly, wide and sure. You mean it? Yeah, Jack said. Let's build something. The sun had climbed higher over Denton, casting long shadows from the shop's roof as the tension in the air slowly turned to something else, anticipation. The ghost of burnt oil and morning coffee still lingered in the air, but it was overpowered now by something electric, possibility, hope, a second chance. Jack stood a few paces from the Rolls-Royce, his hands still bearing the dark grease lines of a man who had done real work, not just for the car, but for himself. His back was straight, his shoulders square, and in his eyes, something had returned. The quiet certainty of a man who had finally stopped running from who he was. Preston Ward leaned against the fender of his prized Phantom V, arms crossed, a knowing smirk slowly transforming into something more genuine. Jack could feel the billionaire watching him, but he wasn't quite ready to speak. Not yet. Not until he processed the whirlwind of a morning that had flipped his world inside out. He glanced over at Marcy, who stood near the shop's entrance, arms folded, but her face soft, open. She was watching him too, not with expectation, but with the kind of respect that can only come from someone who's worked in the trenches. Her offer still rang in his ears, a partnership, not a paycheck, not prestige, but purpose. Caleb stood nearby, wide-eyed, shoulders squared in a way that hadn't been there earlier this morning. The young man looked like he'd just witnessed a miracle, and maybe he had. Jack saw himself in the kid, raw, eager, standing on the edge of something bigger than he understood. Jack took a deep breath. "You know," he said, his voice carrying across the shop, "a man doesn't always get to rewrite his ending." Preston shifted his weight and raised a brow. "That's so?" "That's so," Jack replied, turning to face him. "I spent years hiding on that goat farm. Thought I could tune out the noise, live simple, but turns out you can't outrun what you are." "And what are you, Mr. Sullivan?" Preston asked, tone neutral but eyes sharp. Jack let out a quiet chuckle, then looked around the room, at the lifts, the oil-stained floor, the toolboxes and faces that had once looked past him. Not anymore. "I'm a builder, not just of machines, but of ideas, of places, of people." He let that sit in the air a moment. Caleb nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. "So you're turning down the job?" Preston asked. No offense in his voice, just curiosity. Jack smiled. "I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying yes to her." He looked to Marcy. "I want to build something here. With you." Marcy blinked. It was the closest she'd come to tearing up in years, but she nodded slowly, resolutely. "Then let's get to work." Preston exhaled and stepped forward, pulling out a sleek leather checkbook from his blazer pocket. With a flourish, he scribbled 2 checks. He tore the first and handed it to Jack. $30,000, he said almost casually. "As promised." Then he tore the second, thicker check and turned to Marcy. "And another 50 to get your shop the tools it needs. Consider it an investment and a commission. I'm naming your shop the official restoration team for my fleet." Gasps circled the room. Marcy blinked in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Always," Preston said, slipping his checkbook away. "You folks earned more than money today. You earned my trust, and I don't give that out lightly." Jack looked at the check in his hand, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled napkin with Preston's signature on it. He folded it neatly, like it was a bond more valuable than paper. He tucked it in his shirt pocket. "Might hang this on the wall," he said with a grin. Caleb stepped up, grinning ear to ear. "Hey, Jack, you realize what you just did, right? You didn't just fix a car. You lit a fuse in this town." Jack looked around, the weight of it finally landing. The townsfolk outside the shop were still buzzing, talking, pointing toward the Rolls. A crowd was forming, phones out, pictures being taken. "Maybe we should get a new sign," Marcy said, looking at the dusty metal plate bolted to the shop's brick exterior. "Denton Auto and Restoration has a nice ring to it." Jack smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't come easy for him, the kind that stretched all the way to the corners of his eyes. "Let's get to work," he said, voice firm, quiet, but full of fire. And with that, Jack Sullivan, the man who had once built engines in Detroit, who had vanished into the silence of a goat farm, stepped into his second act. Not as a recluse, not as a repairman, but as a partner, a mentor, and a builder once more. Out front, the Rolls-Royce shimmered under the Texas sun, its engine humming like it had something left to prove. Just like the man, who had brought it back to life. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched you, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us feel a little closer across the miles. Every story finds its home in the hearts of those who need it. And sometimes, that's all it takes. If you'd like to hear more stories that lift the spirit and remind us of the quiet miracles around us, feel free to subscribe. We're building something meaningful here, and it means so much to have you along the way. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending this time with stories. We'll see you in the next one.